Well, this is the second movie this weekend where an American goes off to a foreign land and shit gets crazy. Let's hope there's less pubic hair in this one. So Spider-Man Far From Home tells the story of Peter Parker going on a class trip over throughout Europe while some crazy stuff goes down and he has to team up with Mysterio to take down the elementals. Alright, before I say anything else, if you have not seen Endgame, do not watch this review, do not watch this movie, do not watch the trailer for this movie, get your ass to theater and watch Endgame. Now that that's taken care of, Spider-Man. So Spider-Man Homecoming was a movie that a lot of people loved upon release, was hailing it as the best Spider-Man film, or the best one since Spider-Man 2 at least, and everybody was hailing Tom Holland as the best Spider-Man. Everybody was losing their mind about this movie. I was in the camp where I enjoyed it, but I have a lot of love for the Sam Raimi trilogy and Tobey Maguire's portrayal of Spider-Man. That's my Spider-Man. Even the third film, despite a lot of its flaws, I still love that one. So that's kind of the pretext for where I'm at as far as a Spider-Man movie fan. I enjoyed Homecoming. I certainly liked it better than the Amazing Spider-Man films, but this wasn't top of the MCU tier for me. When I saw the trailers for Far From Home and heard some thoughts from a couple of friends from mine that had already seen the film, it looked to be doubling down on a lot of the things that I disliked about Homecoming. So I walked in with pretty modest expectations. And I'm here to tell you, I loved this damn movie. Color me shocked. I know, I expected to walk out thinking that Homecoming was the better film, especially since how awesome Michael Keaton was as the Vulture, but there was a lot of things that really rang home for me in Far From Home. So let's get into why. So starting with the positives of Spider-Man Far From Home, give hats off to Tom Holland because he is a great Spider-Man. For this version, this iteration of Spider-Man, the quirky high schooler who is still kind of figuring out what he wants to do, you know, in this Avengers post-Endgame world where, you know, things are so big and so grand, and he's been to space and he had this huge epic fight for the entire universe, all this crazy stuff, and just him trying to balance that with the regular teenager high school drama and quandaries and decisions that he has to make. Just with that, he really pulls off all of those different aspects really well. He has really good humor. The acrobatics, I mean, the guy's, I believe he was either a dancer or he was in gymnastics or something beforehand. I've seen clips of him doing, you know, backflips in the air and all these gymnastic moves. I mean, the guy just moves like Spider-Man. It doesn't need a whole lot of CGI or a whole lot of wire work to help him do that. So hats off to him. I like him quite a bit. And give him 3 or 4 more movies, he might overtake Tobey Maguire for me. But that aspect of it, the acrobatics and just the physical performance of Spider-Man, the dude's awesome.
Gotta be someone else you can use. What about Thor?
Off-world.
Captain Marvel.
Unavailable.
But I'm just a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man.
Bitch, please, you've been to space.
Now moving over to Jake Gyllenhaal. Surprise, surprise, Jake Gyllenhaal is kick-ass in pretty much every movie that he is in, for every role that he takes, and he's great in this. He's one of the best aspects of the film. He has a really good interaction with Spider-Man and with the other characters. He's kind of a mentor in some ways. They have to team up in certain ways. There's also some things that kind of come along where he has to test Peter Parker in certain aspects of how he views the post-Endgame world and his relationship with Tony Stark. And there's just things that this character brings into the mix that kind of shakes things up enough for Peter Parker where it puts him in a really good spot to have character growth and to just expand a lot of the emotions of what's going on with Peter Parker and what happened with Endgame and the fate of Tony Stark. So aside from all that, physically, like him in the suit of Mysterio, the way that they utilize the fishbowl look and everything, he's just awesome. He looks great and he's utilized almost perfectly in the film, which I'll get into some details.
This is Mr. Beck.
We could have used someone like you on my world.
Your world?
Beck is from Earth, just not ours. The snap tore a hole in our dimension.
You're saying there's a multiverse?
We have a job to do, and you're coming with us.
I'll probably do a standalone spoiler video where I'll go into certain aspects because there is a lot of big major things that happen in this film that I can't talk about here. But for the most part, I really like what they did with his character and the way that they kind of changed up how we usually view the character of Mysterio.
What do you want, Peter?
I want to go back on my trip with the girl who I really like and tell her how I feel. MJ, I
am Spider-Man.
No, of course I'm not.
I mean, it's kind of obvious.
The other character that I actually really enjoyed this time that I wasn't too hot on in the first movie is Zendaya as MJ. It's not Mary Jane, it's like Michelle or something like that. That still seems weird to me, the things that they changed in Homecoming just for little aha moments, but nonetheless, they only refer to her as MJ in this film, so we can move on. She's MJ. So whether or not it's Michelle, Mary, anything, it's MJ. And she does really good in the role. She's different, she's quirky, she's obsessed with really dark, weird social things, and just the way that she interacts with her class, as well as the way that she interacts with Peter, it's a really entertaining version of that character. And I really like their relationship in this. I think that it's not the forefront thing in the movie. It's certainly one of the bigger motivations for Peter Parker outside of the Spider-Man stuff, as he wants to kind of woo MJ on this class trip. It's one of his biggest priorities is basically getting her to understand how he feels and trying to unlock how she feels, because she's a very difficult person to read. And it was just a charming way that they had those two characters' relationship kind of budding throughout this film. So I actually really enjoyed those two.
What up, dorks?
What's up? We're just talking about the trip.
I'm here in St. Marco Polo's. Oh,
I think MJ really likes me.
That reminds me when I first fell in love.
You're a very difficult person to contact, Spider-Man.
The action sequences are pretty awesome in this. Spider-Man has to take on big, larger-than-life villains, the elementals. So you got one that's made out of like wind, one of them's made out of water, one of them's made out of lava and molten metal and everything. So it's some really cool sequences, especially teaming up with Mysterio and the two very different styles of fighting. One shoots lasers and, you know, has optical illusions that help around him and his fighting style. Spider-Man doing all the Spider-Man flippy and, you know, thwick stuff. So it was cool to see. There's a lot of really cool action sequences in this film. I also think that they utilized being the first film post Endgame pretty damn well, and they also utilized the fallout of Endgame pretty damn well. So the death of Tony Stark, the death of the other characters in the Avengers that weren't quite as high profile as Tony Stark, the way that the world has responded to like half the population showing up randomly 5 years later with no knowledge of what happened to them. They actually kind of explain that in a very funny way in the opening. So the way that they utilize all of that, as well as how it affects Peter Parker and how it affects the characters around him and just the fallout of Endgame, it's a small nugget of what's going on in the film, but especially with like the filling the shoes of Tony Stark, it's a really, really good aspect that they have in this to kind of advance the character and advance the arc of Peter Parker in this version of the MCU. So I think they did pretty damn well going from such a huge, epic weight of Endgame to something that's a little more small scale, a little bit more jokey, and a little bit more fun, like Spider-Man Far From Home.
Everywhere I go, I see his face. I just really miss him.
Yeah, I miss him too. I don't think Tony would have done what he did if he didn't know that you were going to be here after he was gone.
And finally, another positive to leave off on before I transition to some of the things that I didn't quite like was this movie has very big, huge implications for not only Spider-Man, but the MCU as we know it. So there are some very major things that happen in this that will likely have a ripple effect throughout the MCU, as well as the next Spider-Man film, whenever that is. So when those little surprise moments come, they're definitely like sit up in your chair and go, oh, what the hell does that mean type moments. So it's pretty awesome whenever you get a film that you're enjoying and then there's those big moments where you're like, Spider-Man 3, what's gonna happen? I lied. I actually have one more positive. So something I almost forgot to mention, and this was one of the biggest things of why I walked out of the movie with a smile on my face. And this is not spoiling anything. This is not a big reveal. This is just a small aspect of the character growth of Spider-Man that I really loved. One of my biggest issues with Homecoming was how it didn't feel like classic Spider-Man in New York. Like it felt very residential where he was just kind of going across rooftops and stuff. Aside from that, I really didn't like the Iron Man Jr. version of Spider-Man where his suit was like an Iron Man suit. He had all this technology, all these, you know, all these aspects that have even been in the Avengers, the last two Avengers films, where it just felt like Spider-Man was only special because of this technology when he's a hero that never really needed that. He was always special on his own with his powers. This film does a great job of transitioning out of that and utilizing it as a part of his story as like a growth into the Spider-Man he wants to become, breaking away from that Iron Man Jr. Spider-Man into the Spider-Man that I know and love. So without going into too much detail, where they kind of transition his character as a superhero throughout this film, I loved it, and it makes me very excited for what we're gonna see next. Now moving on to some mixed aspects. One of the big ones for me is Nick Fury. Nick Fury and Maria Hill, I believe, are in this film. They're a pretty prominent piece. They're the ones kind of pulling Peter Parker away from his class to do Spider-Man superhero stuff. And while there is an explanation later on in the film for why he is this way, and it's definitely something that people will argue this point for, I feel like Nick Fury was very cold and uncharacteristically dickish in this movie, especially towards Peter Parker. Like, I understand the whole, like, you know, being the leader and being the grizzled, you know, a little bit more cynical leader, military guy that Nick Fury is, that he's trying to like forget all that high school bullshit, Peter. Come on, we got the world to save. Are you gonna stand up or are you gonna go hang out with them at the opera? Let's go. Like, I get the aspect of that for his character, but for somebody that was never a jerk, there's plenty of moments in this film where I felt like Nick Fury was just being very cold and dickish to Peter Parker to the point where it kind of made him unlikable in certain aspects. So I was mixed on it. I got it for certain extents. When they have a little bit of a explanation for why later on in the film, I get why then there was that slight character change. But at the same time, throughout the runtime of the film, it was kind of like, I don't know if I like Nick Fury in this one. Other mixed aspect is the humor. There is humor that lands very well in this. They actually have a line that will probably piss off hardcore comic book fans, but they refer to the spider sense as Peter Tingle. That's something that Aunt May refers to it as, and he's like, stop calling it that. And every time somebody references it, just Peter Parker's reaction is hilarious. There's moments like that in the humor that definitely land home. There's some good laugh out loud moments throughout this. The MCU's always had a pretty good success rate with the humor, but like most MCU films, it does have a bit too much, and there are some jokes that don't land quite a bit. So it's a mixed aspect, because there's humor that really made me laugh, and there's humor where I went, fizzle.
Heads up, Nick Fury's calling you.
I don't really want to talk to Nick
Answer
Fury.
the phone.
Why?
Because if you don't talk to him, then I have to talk to him. I don't want to talk to him. You sent Nick Fury to voicemail?
I gotta go.
You do not ghost Nick Fury.
Now, moving on to the negative. The big one, aside from MJ, I still don't like any of the high school characters in this. That was one of my biggest issues with Homecoming. One of the things that I love so much about the Raimi trilogy is the relationship between Peter and Harry and MJ, and there's so much emotion and so much depth to those relationships that it just felt like throwaway teen goofy comedy in Homecoming, which I understand they were going for. It just didn't quite work for me. And in this one, while I do think it's toned down, and I do think it's either less or I just expect it more, so it's not quite as much of a brick in the face, I don't really like Ned too much. I really don't like Flash Thompson. I think that he's absolutely obnoxious, and not in a funny, entertaining way. Like, I understand now how a lot of people look at Trent in the Friday the 13th movie. Flash Thompson is my Trent. So just a lot of the high school characters, I'm like, when they came on screen, aside from MJ, I'm like, next, get back to the other stuff. And the other negative that I have is that there's moments in this film where it feels really odd and unrealistic, the things that are happening. It's hard to say exactly without going into spoilers, so definitely watch my spoiler review, but there's like sequences in this where Peter Parker is given certain abilities or certain access to things by Tony Stark post-mortem, and it doesn't make sense at all why Tony Stark would give him that much freedom and that much access, being how much Tony Stark knows about how much growth Peter still has to go through as a teenager, as a person, as a hero. So there's things that don't quite make sense within the film, within this universe, within the characters that we already know extremely well, but the script just needs them to be there. So, like I say, it might sound vague as hell and you have no idea what I'm talking about if you haven't seen the film, but if you have, maybe you do. If not, watch the spoiler review. I'll go into a little bit more detail. So all in all, guys, I enjoyed the hell out of Far From Home. I actually am excited to go see it a second time. I did not feel that way with Homecoming, so I don't know if that's gonna be the majority of people's response. I do think that there's been way too much hype for it. It's not the greatest Spider-Man film of all time. It's not the greatest superhero film of all time. I've seen a lot of like people losing their shit on Twitter about how mind blown this movie is. Temper that down a bit. It's really good. It's not epically mind blowing. So if you walk in with those expectations, I think a lot of people, even people who had issues with Homecoming like I did, are really gonna have fun with this one. They're gonna enjoy it, and it's going to kind of be a nice transition from how huge and epic and depressing and just weighty Endgame was into having more fun again in the MCU.
Are you going to step up or not?
So So if you're a Spider-Man fan, an MCU fan, or you just want to go have a good time in the theater for a couple hours, Spider-Man Far From Home is a very enjoyable summer movie, and it is a very good follow-up to Homecoming and Avengers Endgame. So take the whole family out, check it out in theaters, and when it comes to home video, go out and buy it. So what did you guys think of Spider-Man Far From Home? Did you prefer this or Homecoming? Did you have the issues that I had, or did you love Homecoming? Do you feel like this leaves a lot of things that are gonna have huge implications going forward and you can't wait to see that? Or do you feel like there were some things that really jumped the gun in this film story-wise? Try to keep it spoiler-free, but just kind of give me your ideas down below. I will be doing a spoiler review so we can go haywire in the comment sections on that one. But what did you think about Far From Home? And are you a fan of the MCU at all? Put all your thoughts down below in the comment section, guys. Please like and share this video. Hit that subscribe button if you're not already a subscriber. If you guys want to check out some social media links, check down below in the video description for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Just below that, my Teespring store with all my merchandise. So you got t-shirts, pillows, stickers, all that good stuff. Check all that out, as well as my Patreon page in the video description as well, which is a great way to give back to this channel, help this channel grow, and get cool exclusive content for your eyes only if you decide to become a patron. So check all that out, guys. And if you want to check out some more videos, you can check all that out, including my previous review of Homecoming and all of my other MCU content like rankings and my Endgame review. You can check all that out by clicking right over here.